All right, welcome y'all. Today we are going to be building our very own Aroon Up and Down custom indicator in MQL4 for our MetaTrader 4 trading platform. We're also going to cover how to use subfolders in the MetaEditor to better organize our indicators. We're going to go over how to create plots and input variables without necessarily using the setup wizard. Of course, by the end of this, we'll have built our very own super cool and sort of complicated indicator. This is what it looks like right down here. I'll go over in a minute how one would read this and trade with this. And then on top of all that, we're going to troubleshoot some common gotchas. These are bugs that I think you're likely to run into when you're writing your own code for your own indicators. Okay, well, let's dive right into it. All right, so what is the Aroon Up and Down indicator? Well, to answer that, I'm going to direct us to a great resource, Investopedia. I use this all the time. Investopedia is great not only for learning about new indicators, but also for learning more about indicators you might already know about. So let's see what's going on here. So the Aroon indicator is used to identify trend changes in the price of our asset. And it consists of two lines. The Aroon up line, which will measure the strength of our uptrend, and the Aroon down line, which will measure the strength of a downtrend. And the way we calculate these lines we are using a length, kind of like a moving average. We're looking at a certain amount of bars behind the current bar. And let's say for the Aroon up line, we're trying to see within that length, how long has it been since our highest high? If it's been length bars since the highest high in that frame of length, then we're going to get a reading of 0 for our Aroon up line, right? We haven't gotten a new high in quite some time. If the most recent bar in that frame of length, right, the very last bar is the highest high we've had, then we're going to get an Aroon reading of 100. Right, we're getting new highs. The Aroon down line is basically the same thing except for the down line, right? A reading of 0 means that we haven't gotten a new low in quite some time, whereas a reading of 100 for the Aroon down line means that our most recent bar has been a new low. So how you might trade with this indicator is if the Aroon up line crosses up above the Aroon down line. Well, suddenly we're getting more highs than we're getting lows. Maybe that indicates an uptrend, so we'll buy. If the Aroon down line crosses up above the Aroon up line, well, suddenly we're getting more lows than we are getting highs. So perhaps we would sell. This might indicate a downtrend. Okay, so that's the basics of this. We'll get more into the meat of it later on. But just to cover our components again here. We have one input for this indicator. That's the length of our Aroon. How many bars are we looking at to make these calculations for our lines? And then we have two plots, right? The Aroon up line and the Aroon down line. Okay, so let's hop back over to our MetaEditor and let's get everything set up here. So just like we did in the last video, I'm gonna go ahead and click on New. And I do want a custom indicator. Now, in this name bar, as I said in the intro, I want us to use a subfolder for this indicator. And we can do that right as we're creating it right here. So I'm going to put this in a folder. I'll call this Taproot Tutorials. And I highly recommend that you guys create your own folder, perhaps one just for this video series, one for your own indicators. Maybe one for indicators you download from MetaTrader 4. It's a good idea to separate those things from the indicators that came with MetaTrader 4 by default and just keep yourself a little bit more organized. So I totally recommend subfolders. So I've named mine Taproot Tutorials. I'll add a / here, and I can give my indicator itself its name. This will be the Aroon Up and Down. Okay. Author, you put whatever you want. Link, you put whatever you want. Parameters, we are going to have that one input, the length of our Aroon. However, I want us to add that programmatically in the code. So let's just leave this blank. And we can hit on next. Nothing we have to do on this screen, just the OnCalculate function. So we can hit next again. Now, this indicator will be in a separate window. So let's go ahead and check this box. And now, as I said, we're going to get a reading between 0 and 100 for these lines. So let's make that the range of our separate window, just to keep everything looking clean. I'll set my minimum to 0 and my maximum to 100. Okay, for plots, we have two, right? The Aroon up line and the Aroon down line. Let's just add one plot here in the setup wizard, and we'll add the other one by ourselves programmatically. So I'll call this the Aroon up. It will be a line, and for my Aroon up line, I'm gonna go with green. So I'll pick chartreuse, nice, bright, lively green. Okay, that's all we have to do. We can go ahead and click finish. And it'll give us our nice template right here. Okay, so before we dive into this, let's take a look at our file tree on the left. We create a subfolder. In fact, we put this file in that subfolder, but we don't see it. In order to see that update, we actually have to refresh our file tree. So you can just right-click anywhere here and hit on refresh. And there we go. We got Taproot tutorials, and inside we have our Aroon Up and Down.mq4. Like I said, this is a great way to keep your indicators organized. So that tutorial that I did in the last video, right? We made that simple moving average. I'm gonna go ahead and drag that in here. Okay, so one more thing that I wanna point out. If we go to our MetaEditor 4 chart, notice that that didn't update here either. So we're gonna have to refresh this again. Now it takes slightly longer. You could also just close out of MetaEditor 4 and reopen it. Refreshing the file tree is definitely quicker than that. Still takes a little bit of time. And we'll probably cut this. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I got Taproot tutorials now with my Aroon Up and Down and my tutorial SMA. But the old tutorial SMA, it's still in its old spot. However, it has this little gray circle below it. That gray circle indicates that this file is not being found at that location. So we can safely right-click and delete this. Okay, so just a little bit of walkthrough on how to work with that file management system between MetaEditor and MetaEditor 4. All right, let's get back to our code now, though. So the first thing I want to do is let's add that input parameter and the Aroon down plot. We'll do the parameter first, since it's a lot simpler. So I'm going to copy this code here that says indicator buffers. And I'm going to say indicator inputs. Now, the way we create an input in MQL4 is with the input keyword. And then we have to give this variable a type. So this will be of type int, right? This is the length of our Aroon. How many bars are we looking at to calculate our lines? And then we can give this a name. So when I create an input variable, I like to indicate that this is an input variable with a little lowercase I, just to separate it from the other variables in my code. I'll say I Aroon length. And I'm going to set my default value to 7. You guys can play around with this, see what you prefer in your trading, but I'm going to use 7 for mine. We'll also notice in a few seconds, there it goes, that this variable is going to turn like a burgundy or a dark red, just further indication that this is in fact an input parameter and not just your run-of-the-mill variable. Okay, that's all we have to do for the input. Super simple. The plot is slightly more complicated. Let's go ahead and copy all of our code for the Aroon up line, all these properties. And let's make this Aroon down. So we'll change the values of some of these properties. It's no longer called the Aroon up, call this the Aroon down. It will still be a line color. I'm not going to use chartreuse anymore for the Aroon down line. I just want to use red. But if you guys want to see a list of all of your possible colors, you just start typing color here. And there's so many in MetaEditor 4 to choose from. Like we got blanched almonds. We got cornflower blue, corn silk, lawn green, papaya whip has got to be my favorite. Peru, I don't even know what color that would be. Pale goldenrod, fantastic. Feel free to play around with these and kind of experiment. Like I said, there's plenty to choose from. I'm gonna be boring and just go with red. Okay, indicator style, we still want to be a solid line and width of 1 will be good. So there's another thing we need to change here about these properties, and that is the name of the properties as opposed to the value. Notice in our first plot, we had indicator label 1, type 1, color 1. For our second plot, let's change this 1 to a 2, right? So it's not the same property name. So do label 2, type 2, color 2, style 2, width 2. Now let's direct our attention up a little bit to these two properties right here. We no longer have one plot in our code, we now have 2 plots. And change that. And the same thing with buffers. If you guys recall from the last video, the buffer variable is an array that's responsible for actually drawing our indicator on the chart. So now we have 2 buffers, one for the up line and one for the down line. And let's actually add that variable down here under indicator buffers. So I'll copy this. I'll call this the Aroon down buffer. Now there's one more thing we need to do, and that is in our onInit function. And this is just sort of the way MQL4 works. We actually have to map our buffers onto another array. So we can copy this code, set the index of our buffer, and since 0 is taken, let's go with 1 here. And we have to make sure that this matches our variable name, so the Aroon down buffer. Okay. So we can compile now, make sure we're all good. 0 errors, 0 warnings, fantastic. So that is all we have to do to add our own input parameter. Pretty simple, and then our own plot as well. Slightly more complicated, but again, just a lot of copying and pasting, really. That's why I recommend if you are going to do that, add at least 1 plot in your setup wizard just to have that code. Okay, so let's come down to our OnCalculate function now. And let's write that for loop that I talked about in the last video. That's going to be responsible for A, retrospectively drawing our indicator on all the bars already on the chart, and then B, keeping our indicator up to date with the new data coming in. So to do that, we'll create our variable uncalculated bars and set that to rates total minus prev calculated. And I'll say for I equals 0, I is less than uncalculated bars, I plus plus. Inside this for loop is where we will calculate the values for our Aroon lines and then also add those values to the buffer variable to put them on the chart. Okay, so how do we actually calculate the values for this Aroon line, or both of them? For that, I'm going to take us right back to Investopedia. So again, great resource for learning about indicators. They will often straight up give you the mathematical formula for calculating them. So let's just take a look at the Aroon up one. The Aroon down one is basically the same. Also worth noting, we're using a length of 7 as our default value. Investopedia is using 25. So that's where that comes from. So take the length and subtract from it how many periods or bars it's been since the last high, or the highest high rather, in that frame of length. Divide that by the length and then multiply by 100. So this multiply by 100 at the end, all this does is takes a value between 0 and 1 and instead makes it a value between 0 and 100. So this is really just aesthetic. The real meat of the calculation is in this fraction right here. And there's really only one thing we need to figure out, right? 25 and 25 down here, these are constants. That's given to us by the input variable. The only thing we need to figure out is how many periods or bars has it been since the highest high within our frame. So let's go ahead and create a variable to store this value. So we'll do one for the Aroon up and one for the Aroon down. I'll come back to my code here. And right where I'm doing uncalculated bars, I'm going to do, these will be integers. I'm going to say bars since high and set that to 0 for now. And then we can do another one for bars since low for our Aroon down line. Okay, so now that we have these variables, let's give them a value. So for every single bar on our chart, in order to calculate our lines, we need to look at a series of bars behind that bar. So let's create a nested for loop here to achieve that. I'm going to say for, I'll use j equals 0 now since we've already used I. J is less than or equal to our Aroon length, and I'll get into in a minute why I'm using less than or equal to instead of your standard less than, and j++. Okay, so in here is where I'm going to give my bars since high and bars since low a value. So I'm going to write some code, and then we can take a look at how that code works. So I'm going to say if the high, and this is a variable that just comes with the onCalculate function. It's a series array, much like those buffer variables. So the high of 0 will tell us the high of the current bar we're on. High of 1 will tell us the high of the previous bar, and so on and so forth. So let's say high of I plus j. Another little explanation here. I'm using I plus j really just for that first call of onCalculate. When we're drawing this indicator on the bars already on our chart, right? Historically, retrospectively. This is really just going to kind of anchor this calculation here to the for loop above as we're going like back in time. For all intents and purposes, logically, we can really think of this as just high of j. So if high of I plus j is greater than the high of I plus bars since high, then I'm going to set bars since high to j. All right. I'll do the same thing for the low. So if or bar since low rather, the low of I plus j is less than the low of bars since low, then bars since low equals j. Okay. So what is going on in these two lines of code here? How is this algorithm working? I think the easiest way to explain that is going to be visually. So let's hop over to this handy dandy diagram that I've made. And I'll put that back later. So for this, we have to use a little bit of our imagination. Let's pretend that these are candlestick bars on our price chart. And also our Aroon length for this example is going to be 5 right now, just so we have less to work with here. Now, my Aroon length is 5, and my bars since high right now equals 5, and I have 6 bars on the chart. So if you recall that nested for loop, I said if j is less than or equal to Aroon length. So if our Aroon length was 5, then this for loop would iterate 6 times. And the reason is I need to be able to get an Aroon value of 0. And in order to do that, we can come back to the calculation here, this period since, length period high, our bars since high, needs to be able to equal the length of our Aroon. So I can get 0 in the numerator, divided by anything is 0, times 100 is 0. So in order to get bars since high equal to the length, I need to be able to look at length plus 1 bars, right? Because this is my high right now. And it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars since that high. So again, just to recap, in order to get a value of 0 for this indicator, I need to look at length plus 1 bars as my frame of reference. So that's why I was using that less than or equal to back in that nested for loop. Okay, Well, let's pretend that we get a new bar in here and kind of go through that calculation to see what's going on. I'm going to draw this right here. I'll do it in blue. And now we have a new bar, which means this last one is no longer being taken into consideration, right? Our frame of reference has shifted by 1. We're now just looking at these 6 bars. And our current bar since high was 5. But let's go through our nested for loop and see what it comes out to be now. So let's remember, if high of j is greater than high of bar since high, we're going to set bar since high to j. So let's go through j equals 0. So is the high at bar 0 greater than the high at bar 5? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the answer is yes. The bar at index 0 is indeed higher than the bar at index 5. So our bar since high is going to equal j, which is 0. Okay, very good. But let's move on. We have more iterations to do here. So now j equals 1. Is the bar at index 1 greater than the bar at index 0? The answer is no, no change. Is 2 greater than 0? Nothing changes. 3 greater than 0? No, nothing changes. Is the bar at index 4 greater than the bar at index 0? Well, the answer is yes. This is indeed higher than the bar at index 0. So our bar since high is now going to equal 4. Okay, and one last iteration. Is the bar at index 5 greater than the bar at index 4? The answer is no. So nothing changes, and we have now exited out of our for loop, and we're left with a value for bar since high of 4, which makes sense because within our frame, within our 6 bars, it has been 1, 2, 3, 4 bars since the highest high in that frame. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We can imagine pretty much just, the opposite of this for bar since low. But that's kind of how that algorithm is working. Okay, so now that we have our value for bar since high and bar since low, that is everything we needed to get the correct value for our buffer variable. So let's go ahead and fill that in. So I'll start with my Aroon Up buffer. That of I is going to equal, we can come back to our calculation here, right? Length minus bar since high divided by length times 100. So I'll do length minus bar since high divided by Aroon length, all multiplied by 100, and semicolon. And we can do the same thing here for our Aroon down buffer. So the Aroon down buffer is our Aroon length minus bar since low divided by the length multiplied by 100. Okay, so we can compile here. And, bar since low uncleared identifier. All right. Okay, and so we compiled 0 errors, 0 warnings. That's what I like to see. Fantastic. Spoiler alert, though, there are actually 2 bugs still in our code, and you guys may have already figured out what's going to happen here. But let's take a look. Let's come over to our MetaEditor 4 chart, and let's go ahead and add this. So under Tab for Tutorials, my Aroon Up and Down. I'll just hit OK. And we have a problem here. My length is set to 7. So with a length of 7, I would expect to see multiple values here between 0 and 100. But I'm only getting 2 values for my Aroon lines, either 100 or 0 down here. So what's going on? Well, this is a bit tricky, but the thing causing our bug right here is what's known as integer division. And this is fairly common in multiple programming languages. What integer division refers to is if I'm doing algebra or any sort of calculation with solely integer variables or numbers, then the result of that calculation must also be an integer. So if I took 3 and divided it by 2, because of integer division, instead of equaling 1.5, we would truncate the 0.5 and it would just equal 1, because 1.5 is not in fact an integer. So the easiest way to fix that is to just include a double variable in our calculation. So we can do that just by casting our bars sense high and bar sense low as a double. Of course, there's lots of other ways we could fix this, but I think that's just the quickest, simplest way. Oh, we can compile again and check out the chart. And there we go. This is a lot more similar to what we're looking for. However, there is also one more bug in this code, and it's impossible to see right now just by looking at the indicator. Like, everything here is correct. Let's see, I'm on the minute chart here. If I were to wait a couple minutes, I would notice that my indicator isn't staying up to date with the new data coming in. It's actually not moving at all. That's because my indicator has crashed. And one way that we can see this is with our terminal right here. And you guys should totally always have this open. It's terminal, Control T, and we go to the expert section. This is like the error log for what's happening on our chart. And we can see right after our indicator was initialized, we got this error, array out of range. And that, again, didn't erase what was already drawn on the chart, but it did cause the indicator to crash, which means it's no longer going to update. So again, some of you may have already figured that this was going to happen, but why did our array go out of range? What went wrong here? Well, let's think about it. Basically, on that first call of OnCalculate, when we were calculating this value for every bar on the chart, in order to get that calculation, we had to look at a certain amount of bars behind the current bar. Well, what happens when we're at the very first historical bar? There are no bars behind it. In fact, we're not going to have the data necessary to make this calculation until we're at least, in our case, 8 bars in. So we can look at the previous 7. So let's create a little bit of a, we call this like a guard statement inside of our for loop here. And let's say if I is greater than or equal to our rates total. Again, rates total is the total amount of bars on the chart. If I is greater than or equal to that minus our length, let's simply return rates total. So what are we saying here? Basically, we're saying if we don't have enough bars behind our current one in order to do this calculation down below, we're done. We're done with our OnCalculate. We can just go ahead and return rates total, which is what we're going to return anyways down here. So we can compile again now. And again, 0 errors, 0 warnings, fantastic. And now we'll see that this updated and we initialized our indicator without any errors. So fantastic. It will now stay up to date with the new data coming in. All right, and that's while we're here. Let's see how this kind of went. Let's see. So we would have bought right here, and we would have sold potentially right here when the down crossed up above the up. So that wouldn't have been very good. Let's see. We would have sold right here and would have bought back right around here. That would have been bad. Could buy right here and would have sold right here. This is doing quite poorly. Let's see if maybe we're on the hour chart. Okay, that's a little bit better, perhaps. We would have bought right down here and would have sold it potentially up there. That's not too bad. Sometimes this indicator does all right, sometimes it does poorly. The reason I'm kind of doing this right now is to drive home the point that you should never rely on just one indicator. And in fact, the subject of my next tutorial is going to be how can we take multiple indicators and put them into one to create a more comprehensive trading system. So thank you guys for sticking around for the lesson today, and I will see y'all in that next video. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks as always for watching this video. If you found this content valuable, please let me know by liking or subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions or comments about the material we covered today, feel free to drop a comment down below. And of course, please check out some of my other videos for more useful information. All right, I'll leave y'all to it.